Okay, so welcome back. Now, this is part 2 in our series on Microsoft Excel VBA, or Visual Basic for Applications. And I encourage you to take a look at the first part, which is kind of an overview. And we talked about how this Visual Basic in Excel is going to be fairly familiar to you if you come from a programming background in, say, Visual Studio, Microsoft Visual Studio, because there's an IDE, or Integrated Development Environment, inside Excel that's very, very similar to Visual Studio. So you'll feel right at home. So here we are in a blank workbook in Microsoft Excel. I'm in Excel 2010, but I think most of this applies to any other version of Excel. So the first question is, how do I write Visual Basic code in Excel? Where do I go? Well, if you look up here, you look at these tabs up here, there's nothing that seems to say anything about development. But what you have to do is you need to right-click on one of these tabs and go down to Customize the ribbon. And click on that, and this big set of options comes up. If you go over to the right and you look down here, there's one that's not checked, and that's called Developer. So you check that, hit OK, and then you go back, you notice, there's the Developer tab, okay? This is where you'll be working to be doing your Visual Basic development in Excel, okay? So we'll click on that, and there's your tab of all the functionality for doing development work. Now, we're briefly going to go through some of these so you get a feel for what's here. On the far left is the most important. That is the Visual Basic IDE. So we click on that, and up comes this IDE. And like I said before, if you're familiar with Visual Studio and you look at this, it may look fairly familiar and you might feel kind of comfortable. Over here, there's a project. We're on Book 1, Workbook 1, Microsoft Visual Basic for Applications. And this is kind of like the Solution Explorer in Visual Studio. And on the top, you've got a Visual VBA project. It's called Book 1. And you can see up here, Workbook 1, Microsoft Excel. And below it, you've got Microsoft Excel objects. You've got 3 sheets that are objects. And if you look in your spreadsheet, you've got Sheet 1, Sheet 2, Sheet 3 down here on the bottom left. So these are called objects, and that may give you a hint that we're talking object-oriented stuff here, which might also make you feel kind of comfortable. And so this is kind of like the Solution Explorer in Visual Studio. Now down here, you can see properties. And again, from Visual Studio, you've got a properties window that allows you to modify the properties of the different objects you're working in. Maybe like a Windows Forms application, you can modify the properties. This is very similar. Now over here, we've got a blank area, and this is where we're going to be writing our code. And the code is going to be in what are called modules, and we'll look at that in a bit. But this is basically where you write the code, similar to Visual Studio. And we're also going to see that we can write the code and we can step through it and put breakpoints and everything else. Down in the bottom here, we've got the locals window. And if you're familiar with Visual Studio, you know you can use this. As you step through your code, you can watch the local variables change value, and you can step through and see if your code is working right. And we can go up here to the menu bar, and we've got the File, we've got Edit, we've got View, and here's where you can select, I want the immediate window. And again, that may sound familiar, where you can do interactions with your code. Here's the locals window, the watch window, and again, this all may be familiar if you have a programming background. Here's where you can insert a user form, very much like a Windows form. As we showed in the first video, you can develop a Windows form type of application. And a module, which is where we're going to be doing most of our work, and also a class module, which we'll talk about in a bit. Format, you can change the format. Here's the debug, where you can, again, maybe look familiar from Visual Studio. You can step into, step over, step out, add a watch variable that you can watch as you step through your code. toggle breakpoints, clear all breakpoints. So again, very familiar. You can run a macro, break, reset, and tools like, as you know, in your Solution Explorer in Visual Studio, you can have reference libraries or references or external system references. You can use macros, and there's a bunch of things we can do that we're going to look at. Add-ins, you can add in some code into your project, and we'll look at that. And that's basically what we've got here in our IDE. Again, very similar to Visual Studio, and we're going to get into this in a bit of detail in a bit. Let's go back to the Developer tab. Again, we can select macros, and here is the record macro. This is extremely, extremely important. You want to, in my view, this is a very important part of the IDE. And we're going to look at examples of how this will help you write your code, because it will allow you to manually do things in your spreadsheet and do a bunch of steps in your spreadsheet and record that, and it will write out the code that you can use in Visual Basic to repeat those steps. So if you don't know what code I need to do to, for example, set this column format of all the cells, I just go through, record the macro, select it manually, and then stop the macro, and it will tell me what the code I need to reproduce that. Okay, very, very important. Add-ins, here you can add in external libraries, analysis toolpack, various solver add-in, and here I've got my VBA functions is kind of an add-in I've made. You can make a whole bunch of these with code that you want to use repeatedly, and it's basically a library that you add into your project. Very useful. Here we've got the insert, where you can insert into your spreadsheet forms like a button. We showed in the first video where you can add buttons, you can add combo boxes, you can add check boxes, you can add all kinds of controls right into your spreadsheet and click on those controls and do something in Visual Basic. Design mode is when you are working in your spreadsheet and say you've got a button and you want to be able to modify it. You go into design mode, and that allows you to modify. When you go out of design mode and you click on the button, that actually runs the code. So it puts you in the mode to modify or to run. And then you've got the properties, you've got the view the code behind, like if you have a button, you can view the code behind it, and so on. So that's basically the layout of this Developer tab. So let's go back into Visual Basic, and here's our IDE. So now let's see how you actually write code in Visual Basic to interact with your spreadsheet. And like I said, a big part of this learning is going to be something you may not be used to, and that is how to interact your code with your spreadsheet. You're going to have to deal with cells and ranges of cells. So we're going to have a separate video talking about that, because it's extremely important that you get to be an expert in interacting your code with your spreadsheet. So the first thing we're going to do, I've got the IDE open and I've got a spreadsheet open. And the first thing we want to do is we want to select our project up on the top here, right click, and insert a module, okay? And you can see it gives us a blank module that we can write our code to interact with a spreadsheet. So let's start out by writing a simple subroutine. So I'm going to type sub, and I'm going to call it do stuff, and 2 parentheses, and hit enter. It automatically specifies the scope of the subroutine by putting in an end sub. So subroutine, you name it, parentheses, and end sub ends the scope, okay? No curly brackets, you have to actually type out end sub. Now, this is kind of like you've seen before in other programming languages, like a method or a subroutine or a function. You basically have parentheses, and in this case, you can also pass a parameter into the subroutine by putting it into these parentheses, okay? We're not going to do that with this. We're going to make it very simple. So I'm going to go down the middle. I'm going to hit tab. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't automatically format your your code so that you've got indents. You have to do it yourself. But let's first write a line of code to set the value of one of our cells. Now to do that, we're going to use what's called a range command, R-A-N-G-E, and we're going to set A1 dot value equals 345. Okay, so we have just written a bit of code that specifies that the value of this A1 cell is to be 345. Now how do I run that? Well, if the cursor is inside the scope of this subroutine, so I've got the cursor right here, I go up here and you can see there is a run sub. It's a play button, basically. So if I've got the cursor in there, I hit play, and there you go. You've got 345 as the value placed in A1. Now again, this range command is going to be extremely, extremely important, as are some other functions and commands that you're going to use to interact with your spreadsheet. And we're going to talk about that in a future video. But it's very important you get that expertise in dealing with your spreadsheet. Now, let's set up a variable. Let's set up a, like we do in C# or any other code, let's set up a variable. Now in Visual Basic for Excel, the way we do it is we do a dimension, and we're going to call it as double. Okay, that is how you define a variable called myvar as a double. All right, so we can say myvar equals 345.01. All right, so now we have specified that's the value of the myvar, and then we can now place that here so that we are now changing the value of A1 to myvar. So again, we can run that 345.01. Okay, so it's really pretty straightforward. You do same functionality as most programming languages, but again, you're going to have to know the code to deal with the to interact with the spreadsheet. Now let's do some debugging. Okay, so as with Visual Studio, you can put breakpoints. Right, so I'm going to put a breakpoint in here, and I'm going to run to this breakpoint. So I can hit this play button, and you can see the yellow arrow goes down here. As with Visual Studio, that line of code hasn't been run yet. It's about to be. So then I hit F8, and we'll step past it, and now it's down to this, so it's set myvar. And if you go down here to the locals, you can see myvar is 35.01. So in the same way as Visual Studio, you can look at the variables, the locals, as you step through. So now the next thing is going to be run is this range command to set the myvar equals to A1, and it's done. So now one other very important thing that I think in writing code is very important, being able to comment your code. And to do that, there are some buttons available. I've got them up here, but you may not have them. They're not by default shown, and they are comment and uncomment, again, very much like Visual Studio. So you can right-click up here on the toolbar and hit Customize, and go down to Edit, and you scroll down to Comment Block and Uncomment Block, and you just click on this and drag it up to this ribbon or button or toolbar, and it will add those. So I encourage you to do that. It's a little bit easier to make code. So let's say I wanted to comment out this, so I can go up here to the comment, and you can see it automatically comments it out. So now let's say I've got this A column, and I've got this number here with 2 decimal points. And what I want to do is I want to change that for all of the cells to make it 4 decimal points. But I don't know the code in Visual Basic that I would need in order to do that. So how do I find out? Well, we're back to this record macro that I say is very, very important. So what you can do is I can click record macro, and I'll have a default macro name. I'll call it macro 3, whatever, and I will hit OK. And right now it is recording a macro. So what I can do is I can go through the steps manually to change the format of these cells. So I select the entire column, right click, format cells, and here I can go select I want number, and let's say I want 4 decimal points. So I hit OK, and you can see it's gone to 4 decimal points. So I stop recording, and I can go back to my Visual Basic, and you can see it added a module here that has the code for that macro. All right, and here is the code to select the column and then to change the format. So I can just Control-C, copy, go to my module 1, and tab, paste, and I have now added the code necessary to change the format of this column. So let's go back to the spreadsheet, change the format back, format cells, I'll give it 1 decimal point, and then I can go to Visual Basic, I can run my code, and it should change it back to the right format. So I select in here, hit run, and you can see it's changed it back to the 4 decimal point format. So again, macros are extremely, extremely useful to help you figure out what the right code is. Now, one more thing I want to talk about, and if you saw my video on Fortran, you'll recall that there is an option in Fortran. Fortran can assume that based on the name of a variable, it's a certain type. So for example, with Fortran, if the name of the variable started with the letter I through N, I think, it would assume it's an integer. With Visual Basic, it's very similar. In Fortran, you can say, no, don't assume anything. Make me specify the type of variable. And here we did myvar, we specified it's a double. If you don't tell it, then Visual Basic will do its own assumptions. So what I do, and I think it's very, very important, whenever you're writing code, in the beginning, to use the option explicit, which says, okay, Visual Basic, make me specify for every variable what type it is. Don't assume the type, all right? And that's good because if you come back to some code and you see a variable and you're not sure what type it is, it can get very confusing. So I'm a big fan of using this option explicit. In Fortran, it was implicit none, but it's the same type of thing. Okay, so in the next video, we're going to look at macros and add-ins, basically code libraries that you can build up and make available to all of your Excel projects. Whenever you open Excel, you'll have these libraries available. For example, we're going to be looking at making a open file dialog. If you're familiar with Windows Forms, it opens up a dialog, a window that allows you to select a file from a directory, and it will be a code library or a macro that will allow you to do that, and it will return the value of the path that you selected, and you can use that in any project or worksheet or whatever. And stuff like that is great because you can have these libraries on hand that you've already written, and it'll make your coding a whole lot easier. So anyway, I hope that helps. Take care and have a really good day. Thanks.